what I want to talk about today is kind of like a mystic phenomenology, but it involves two other things. What is called in the tradition or in esotericism, the reconnection or the re-establishment of the angel's wings, or the breath of the divine, or the zone of silence. In ancient times, man had a closer connection with the breathing in and out of the spirit. In Greek, the same word for both spirit is the same word as wind. And so you can see when you go back to the ground of being and the beginning of history as we know it, as culture, not as what the results of carbon dating come up with, but the history of culture, you see those two things unite. And that is really important because in modernity, physical breathing has separated itself from spiritual breath, which is grace and benediction, the breathing in, and prayer and effort, the breathing out. You put in your prayer and effort, and benediction is given to you. But throughout the practice of concentration without effort, like I've talked about before, you're moving from a non-likeness towards the likeness of God, or you're moving towards the image of God. It's coming from, your guardian angel essentially is the image of God in you, and you're collaborating with him towards the change of the non-likeness that you are as the empirical subject to the transcendent self, which is where you want to be. So the development of this re-establishment of this zone of silence or this divine breath, which you can feel mystically in your phenomenology, you can feel it in a extrasensory way, like there are better to call it unconscious organs that are brought online, which all over your body, you almost have a second sensory of all the same senses, but they can feel movement from outside. And essentially the mystic phenomenology of it, and this is from direct experience, is a breathing, and that's the Christ will, in and out. It's like wind. So we can account for that with, and even when you look deeply enough into the poetry and the philosophy, that's what's happening. You can see it in Bible quotes, is that you don't know where it comes or goes. Those who are born of the Spirit, right? It's a wind. It's a rhythmic system wind. And really these wings that we're talking about, let's think about it this way. So this breath that we want to re-engage contact with, that is how that's done in one part. It's like I've talked about before. Your prayer life has to connect with the psychology of your mind and your prayers, your directed conscious self. Conscious prayer life needs to be connected to vital currents, which means you need to connect them with the body. And those in turn move to spiritual currents. So to reconnect wings, on your side at the least, it needs to be the case that you bring your conscious prayers into the unconscious level of where the vital psychic currents are, or vital forces. At the least you can detect that there are vital forces. Some days you're tired, some days you're not. This same flow is what you need to re-engage with in terms of, as you're praying, you should be praying the Jesus prayer, as is said, prayer without cease. That happens over time once you reconnect to these psychovital currents with your conscious prayer. Your soul, which you connect with that way, can pray unceasingly if you pray in connection with the automatic breath. Attend, bring your attention to the breathing. And on the in-breath and the out-breath, follow the Jesus prayer while you're attending that. I think even Epicurus said that it's planted in the very guts. In the very guts, right? So your knowing self needs to, the conscious prayer needs to be planted in the guts of the unconscious. By attending, bringing your attention to the belly and the deep belly as you breathe in and out, and follow the prayer as you do that. Throughout the day, even walking down the street, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. let the speed of your automatic breath determine the speed of the prayer in your head. And that is part of relinking those things. But all that does is raise what are wings, the will, into, instead of the horizontal and expanding on the horizontal in space, on the vertical. And so you go, what's wings? Like, what are you talking about with wings? How do we have wings? Think about your legs. You don't have legs. You don't have a will to move and advance because you've got legs. You've got legs because of your will to advance in temporality. You don't have hands. You don't have a will to grasp because you've got hands. You've got hands because you've got a will to grasp. So your body in temporality comes from the will that you are. That's how an idealist understands these things, and that's quite true. So all wings are the opposite of legs in the eternal. So they are a will to advance, just adjusted upwards towards the transcendent self. In that prayer and in those concentration exercises, reattaching it to your body in the depth of the guts, right? Into the automatic breath, into the rhythmic system. You're moving the center from the conscious self to the unconscious, to the rhythmic system, letting it determine things and reconnecting these things that have been torn apart by Cartesian dualism, by the subject and the object, by the psychotechnology. You're reunifying these things, but it's not just done by you. When you're doing this concentration without effort, it's really important to recognize that you're not grasping the divine. You're not taking it. You're balancing. And the best metaphor to understand this is that, especially when you start to do practices that go up to an hour and you start to recognize the zone of emotiveness and where the fire of Emmaus is, you learn how to attend both the all and the point, until the point where it closes your eyes for you, and then the point where you're also attending the breath, and grace centers your breath and speeds your breath up very fast, and then slow, and just controls all that for you. And you've become that tightrope walker. You must remember that throughout it, it's not something that, oh, if I just get it perfect, this initiation will be complete. It's he's growing you. Grace is entering you. You're establishing a relationship with very real parents. Very real parents. The parents of everyone and everything. And like I mentioned wings before, that the wings that you're reestablishing are that attending of will upwards. That you're just knocking. You're just knocking on the door, and as Christ says, he'll open the door to you. But another analogy that helps understand this opening of the door is you're like a gull. You're not flapping your wings, right? The wings that you have as these reestablished angelic wings of will that you have, of will and contemplation, of Gnostic and magic wings, are not, you don't flap them when you're doing concentration without effort. You glide. And the best metaphor that I was shown, even miraculously, I was shown this, trying to understand it. In your concentration without effort, have you ever seen what happens when birds try to go upwards on a thermal? The sun, towards the sun beams down, heats up the air, and the birds slowly form into a flying V. And this is you, your mental substance is slowly calming down as you are doing the concentration without effort. And the concentration becomes concentration without effort, and you're raising slightly the sleepiness until your eyes close, and you're still awake, and you're attending, and you're like this flock coming together. And these birds are circling, right, as a spiral towards the sun, but they're not grasping, they're not doing it themselves, they're just gliding. And the heat from the thermal, which is the reaching down of the divine, into divine, there's two types of gravity. There's temporal gravity, and then there's divine gravity from the omega point, from Christ, from the point of hope. And think about it again like the sun, as a spiritual sun, though. It's heating the ground and the thermal, and you are spiraling up, and you're just balancing. You're balancing unconscious and unconscious, attending the point and all. Also the breathing. And you'd also be praying when you started until perhaps your breath gets faster. Again, you're not controlling your breath. It's just controlled from outside later on, but that won't begin for quite a long time. But the point is, you're slowly spiraling up, and you're balancing towards the sun, and you're never grasping and pulling, trying to pull, because that is just fake and just won't work. Because, like I said, you knock, and the Lord answers. Anything else is Icarus, and your wings get burnt off if you try flap up. You're balancing, and you're drawn up. That's what concentration without effort is. So that's the metaphor. It's the gliding, and slowly the birds come together and harmonize, and then they're in a flying V, just gliding, not flapping their wings, balancing like we said, the tightrope walker, going upwards towards the sun as it draws them in. There's no other way. There are three types of wings, really. There's the Icarus wings of the humanists, which can only develop to a certain degree, and then they burn off as they go too close to the sun. There's the wings of the demon, which delves into irrational forces to drive it. And then there are the angelic wings, which knocks on the door. Knock on the door, and that by reconnecting the vital flow, it can only, the wings, and then what we understand is that wings can only be granted to you, these appendages of the will moved upward by the three oaths: chastity, obedience, poverty. And through this, on your side, what comes after prayer? All you can do is do the out-breath, which is the rising of the wings. It's like you're a bird. Through your concentration without effort, through your prayer, the other side has to come and give you the wings. Grace has to be granted. But you definitely put effort in. You definitely do your side of it, and must do your side of it to do this. But what happens is the other side, grace is granted to you, which is the in-breath. And so eventually you begin to be able to sense this breath, like I said, which is the Christ will, in the second sensory, the element that you develop of all your different senses. And so those wings of will that you aim up have two things. The left wing is the Gnostic wing, which is connected to the divine Sabbath, divine understanding, and that's the wing by which you contemplate towards the Lord and the outside, God. The right wing is the magical wing. That's the wing by which you are a conduit for divine revelation, which could be action or it could be image. So those two wings, they're like polar opposites. They ascend and descend. And these practices of concentration without effort are the means by which you slowly reconnecting to this gift of the heart, which in finality can only be done by collaboration, as I've said in the past. This zone of silence in initiation, again, all this I'm speaking about is from experience. It surprises you at first. You don't know exactly what it is. Really, it's important for you to be constantly listening to meditations on the tarot as you're going through this process. And it'll just be something you don't recognize what it is. It'll just say, this is strange. I don't know what it is. But it'll become more and more clear that that's the zone of silence. The zone of silence is as if there's a breathing in and out that you can detect across all your senses, but mainly here, mainly closer than where you attend the all that I've talked about, the all of vision, closer than that. Kind of, you could consider it, this helped me when I came to realize it was the zone of silence, it's sort of close to the emotive zone, but also if you're doing an exercise where you attend your eyes, the physical eyes and the head, and the chest or the heart area and the stomach, and then the back of the head, and then the shoulders. This is like a body scan exercise. And then the lower back. Then you do the middle, right? So you use what helped me was, or I sort of came across it was the eyes, where you're used to attending around the all area, or that static zone I talked about before. And you're attending both the front here and the back. And then you try to find your way to attend between them in the center of the brain, you could think about it. Really, it's just a metaphor or a symbol to help you discover this place, which is not the physical brain, because there aren't sensory stuff there, right? And so another way of thinking about it is that it's closer than what is closest to you, this zone you're attending. And you should eventually, and when you want to try see if you can notice this zone of silence, and this will be like 4 months into the practice, right? Between 3 and 5 months into the practice. You can do that between both the back, but do it after the concentration exercises. You should be keep your attention on and make sure that you are always attentive to the heart. When in all these texts they talk about the heart, that is the means by which intellectual vision, and also which is a unseen fire, which is when understanding is directly transmitted from the divine to you in certainty that God is there, even though you don't see him imagistically, or even in active unconscious you don't see him either, but you just have a certainty he's there. That's intellectual vision, and Saint Teresa talks about this. The synthesis of that, and also the imagistic, active unconscious, which is what you see and hear in incorporality, and these are these active faculties that are awakened throughout this process, movement, visual, and this is in Meditations on the Tarot. The synthesis of those two is the heart. The heart is the zone from which emotiveness comes from. And that's where you will notice the deep, 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 and will become more deep as it goes on, blendings of the qualities of love, which actually become objective, and you know with certainty it's something issuing from which is not you, the emotiveness. And it will happen again and again and again when you say something to God, you say something to Jesus, and it's that emotiveness as if it's from him. It is from him. Or any of the other hierarchies like St. John or St. Michael and Mary, the mother who you should be praying to a lot, they will send from that emotive zone. And I speak of direct experience, and I'm so thankful to God that he sent someone like Valentin Tomberg to us to help us with this, is that you need to keep attentive to the heart and see how it interacts with the miraculous. If the God tries to communicate through birds, let's say, and that does happen all the time, these miracles of coincidence, as well as in active imagination. Say a bird, often I've found that when birds fly at you and over you, they are a magical symbol or a miracle of coincidence, and they align with the emotive zone. You'll feel the subtleties of the hierarchies descending towards you through that warmth and all the different mixes of that spiritual warmth. As Tomberg says, if you want to know who decides to go their way with you, angels, Jesus, Mary, throughout the day, you won't notice it unless you keep your eyes on the heart. And that heart is called the Emmaus fire, the fire of Emmaus. You can think about it like what Gandalf says: I'm a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of an all. That secret fire, that Christopher, flame bearer, you are the flame bearer of the fire of Emmaus. And it's called the fire of Emmaus, Emmaus, because it was the road to Emmaus that the disciples saw the resurrected Jesus, and they said to each other that, did we not recognize, were our hearts not aflame before we recognized what he looked like? Because he appears as a different age when he returns. And that sense, emotive zone, with its incredibly complex sendings, are not just emotions. All language comes from this. All music comes from this. All this stuff is prelingual. And when they talk about the language of angels, this is the language of angels. It's sub-propositionalized language, and that's spoken to you through that emotive zone in the fire of Emmaus, and in direct understanding, which connects with that. The language of angels is sent with direct understanding. So keep your eyes on that emotive zone, and you'll know, and that it will align with miraculous things in facticity that happen. And the star is another mystical phenomenology that you'll see a lot. And when you get a clear look at it, it'll look like a point and a circle around it, which is an ancient symbol, actually. Again, it's very see-through. And really, this is the star of hope. It's the omega point. It's Christ that appears as a confirmatory sense in active imagination, very subtly. Say, if you're looking at the sky around the center of vision, sometimes around it, though, that star will appear. It's another mystic phenomenology. And you use, of course, the Hermetic philosophical epistemology when you're doing all this stuff to use all these senses together to confirm the communication. So miraculous, but also active imagination and the fire of Emmaus, the emotive zone. And also there's a kind of pressure, like I mentioned with the breath, you can feel that, like a movement and a pressure. And so they all come together, and you just know with certainty too sometimes, because of intellectual vision, which St. Teresa describes. Like, you just know with certainty, because the certainty of faith is a substance that's granted to you by the divine as this process continues. But yeah, so you've got a few tips there of how you can discover the zone of silence after you've been going for a few months. You won't discover it until you've connected the conscious prayer life, which is the conscious aiming towards God, but it must go through the vital life to get to him. It must go through the reconnection of the propositionalized mind to the vital forces of the body, which then in turn go to the psychological forces and the spiritual forces from there. So again, this is very clear in Valentin Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot, but I know from direct experience, I did this by accident. I just thought I'll attend the breath as well. And again, Epicurus is another quote where he says, it is like planting a tree root in the guts and in the entrails. And he means the actual root, like actually attend it with your mind as you're praying and doing these things. And you might want to, as you're going through your practice, you could expand your attendings to the whole body. Some people do that, which was an ancient practice as well, called incubation, where you'd attend every sense of the whole body. But the main thing is the breath, the automatic breath. There's nothing more meaningful than the rediscovery of the organs and of the breath of Christ and Christ's will that comes towards you and has wanted to reconnect with you since the beginning of your birth, since you were born. You've been split from him since you were born. And by doing this, by reconnecting the wings with his grace and the help of his grace, you are the prodigal son returning home. And you should deeply understand that story, understand what that means, is that more important than your biological father and mother are your mother and father eternally, that spawned both your biological mother and father, that spawned everything and everyone, and which we all go back to Mary and Jesus, Mary, Sophia, and Jesus Christ, the Savior. And they are more important than anything here and anyone. And they've got your best interests in mind and want to reconnect with you. They love you. And they've got your moral development in mind too, which is why they don't interfere. God bless you.